Hola a todos, soy Javier Poveda y esto es De Bien TV, el canal donde te lo vas a pasar de bien mientras aprendes geografía, historia e historia del arte. Este vídeo va dirigido a mis alumnos de segundo de la ESO de sección grupos B y E del IES Niel Armstrong de Valdemoro. Antes de comenzar, como siempre, os deseo que estéis todos y vuestras familias lo mejor de salud que podáis y que pues, este confinamiento os esté siendo lo más, o pues, lo esté llevando de la mejor manera posible. Así que hoy vamos a continuar la de Unit 9, Cities, en el punto en el que lo dejamos en el vídeo anterior, que es el punto 4, Cities Throughout the World, y para el cual os he preparado una diapositiva, así que vamos a empezar en la misma en la slide 10. So, let's go. Okay, so here we are. We are on the part 4 of the Unit 9, which title is Cities Throughout the World. And we're going to talk about the differences between the cities in the developed countries and the cities in emerging countries. Here you can follow the lesson in the textbook. We are on page 158. Okay, if you want to check it out on the book. So we are going to talk first about the cities in developed countries, and we have here that in developed countries, urban space expanded greatly in the 19th century due to industrialization. Why is this? Because in the 19th century, if you know, the Industrial Revolution occurred. They were built a lot of factories, and they were built in cities, in the outskirts of cities. So these factories needed a lot of workers, a lot of workforce. So it happened what we call a rural exodus, which is the movement, the migration of a lot of people from the rural areas to the urban areas. So these people need a place to live, so a lot of neighborhoods and houses were built in the outskirts of cities, so the population of the cities grew a lot in the 19th century. This urbanization that I have talked about takes place on the outskirts, on the outside of the cities and the nearby municipalities of these cities. So throughout the developed countries, cities have a very similar structure. There's a comma missing here. Which is this structure? First, in the center, we have what we call a historic center with its historical buildings, monuments, and narrow streets. However, North American and Australian cities may not have a historic center because its foundation was recent. So in the cities, in the middle of the cities, in the center, usually in most of the, well, in almost every European city, we have a historic center, which is the nucleus, the core of the city that comes from antiquity or from the modern age or medieval age. For example, here in Madrid, the historic center is what it's called El Distrito Centro or El Madrid de los Austrias, and we have several historic buildings, and we have very narrow streets because there was no urbanization plan on that time. For example, here I am showing you la Plaza Mayor de Madrid, and as you can see, there is a lot of streets, a lot of very narrow streets because there was no planning back in the day. Nowadays, the usual plan of the cities is an orthogonal system, which cities cross with each other and perpendicularly in a 90 degrees angle. But on that time, this time, for example, in the 17th century or 16th century, there was no planning at all. That's why we find this type of planning in the historic center. In the North American and Australian cities, they are colonial cities that were founded very later on time. So they usually, instead of an historic center, they have a CBD, which we talked about in the past video. And this CBD, this central business district, acts as this central zone in these cities. Then we have around the historic center, we have the city extensions or ensanches. We also talked about this in the previous video, and they were built as residential areas in the 19th century as city populations grew. This is the This is the neighborhoods of the people, of these workers that came in the 19th century to work on the factories. And finally, we have the outskirts that appear as new residential areas since the 50s, the 1950s. Here I have brought to you an example of part of Madrid outskirts, the most recent outskirt of Madrid that was built on Madrid, which is El Pau de Vallecas or El Ensanche de Vallecas. Okay, so these are the main characteristics of cities in developed countries. Now we go to the cities in the emerging countries, the countries that are developing. So they usually have the following structure. They also have a historic center, but this center can be very different because the emerging countries there are very different types of emerging countries, and the historic center depends on the background, on the past, on the history of each country. For example, we can find Muslim cities or Roman cities or Asian cities. Here I have brought to you an example of a Muslim city, the historic center of Samarkand, which is in Uzbekistan in Central Asia. And as you can see, this is a typical, we can say that, Muslim city. The Muslim cities, for example, have very low height buildings, and they have a lot of mosques in the, you remember what a mosque is in the unit of Al-Andalus. And they have a lot of mosques, for example, here. And this is the average landscape of a Muslim city. But we can find Asian cities or Chinese cities, for example, or I don't know, Latin American cities also. Then these cities usually have also a CBD that was built. These CBDs were built after decolonization next to the historic center. So these cities started developing after the country gained its independence, and it usually was, well, in Latin America it was in the 19th century. In Africa and Asia, most of the countries gained their independence in the 50s, in the 1950s, and they built a CBD next to the historic center. Then we have slums. The slums, which are located on the outskirts, they have precarious self-built houses and no basic public services. We can translate slums as barrios marginales or barriadas, and here we have an example of slums in Mexico DF, in Distrito Federal de Mexico, which is the capital of Mexico. And as you can see, the houses are built very close to each other. They are very small, they are very simple, and they don't have, their streets are very narrow, and they usually don't have basic services such as water or waste management, or sometimes even electricity. So this is a problem that is happening in these cities in emerging countries. Then we have the industrial estates. Please, estate starting with an E, not a state, which is estado. Estate, it's a good that cannot be moved. Okay, so it's a building or it's a terrain. It's what we call in Spanish un bien inmueble, que no se puede mover, que no se puede desplazar. Un edificio o un terreno, una propiedad. These industrial estates are built on the outskirts of cities with money invested by the developed countries in order to manufacture goods at a lower cost. What is this? This means that many international companies, many companies that have their headquarters in the developed countries, they built their factories in emerging countries, in the cities of emerging countries. Why is that? Because the salary they have to pay to the workers is lower than the one they would have to if the factory was located in the developed countries. So in order to pay less money, they go to the emerging countries and they set their factories there. They establish their factories there. For example, if you look at any of your clothes or your mobile phone or whatever good you have, and they usually you can look at the at this etiqueta, and I cannot find the word right now, and they usually is written made in China, made in Taiwan, made in Indonesia, made in, I don't know, Thailand. So why is that? Because many of this industrial activity moves to the emerging countries because of the expenses, which are lower than in the developed countries. Then we are going to the next part of the unit, which is urban hierarchy. And we have to talk about the cities and their sphere of influence. So the different functions of cities, which we already know, determine their sphere of influence over other cities. So larger cities usually have a much larger sphere of influence than, here's a typo once again, because PowerPoint insists in correcting me to Spanish. I cannot change the dictionary of PowerPoint, my bad, I'm sorry. Than, so we have an H here between the T and the A, smaller ones. This means they attract, and here also it's with two T's and one R, I'm sorry, people from a wider area because of the functions they can offer. For example, Madrid is the most important city in Spain, and Madrid attracts people from Spain, from all over Spain. Many people come here. Why? To work, because there's a lot of work here, and because Madrid has its sphere of influence all over the country. So the urban hierarchy is a classification of cities according to different factors: the sphere of influence, the economic or financial importance, the efficient transport network, etc. What is this? This means that regardless of the population, we will talk about it later, if the city have the bigger sphere of influence it has, or the more economic or financial importance it has, or the more efficient transport network it has, it is going to be their hierarchy. They are going to be placed higher in the urban hierarchy. Here you have a diagram of the urban hierarchy from since the less important cities, hamlets, villages, and we are as we go up in this pyramid, the importance of the cities is higher. So we have towns, we have cities, we have regional cities, and we have, well, national cities that doesn't appear here, and global cities, which are the most important cities in the world. As you can see, the higher we go, the larger number of services the cities have, and the more urban population it has also. So now we're going to talk about the world urban hierarchy, and it is based on the level of influence of cities regardless of their population. This means that the importance of the city, their place in the urban hierarchy, it is not determined by the population. So it is not that the more population it has, the more important it is. There are cities which have a not very large amount of population, but they are more important than cities which are more populated. So in these categories, we can find the following: the global cities, the national cities, and the regional cities. So in the global cities are the cities that have influence on other cities all over the world. They are well-established economic and financial centers, and they attract highly qualified professionals, which are known as human capital, from all over the world. These global cities are the most important cities of the world, and people from all over the world can go there and to work there, or because the most important meetings are held in these global cities. We will see it later. Then in the second step of this hierarchy, we have the national cities, which influence is limited to their own country. An example of this would be Madrid or Barcelona. They usually have the headquarters of national institutions and large companies. For example, in Madrid, you have the headquarters of Bankia or Telefónica or BBVA or I know, Santander, etc. Okay, but Madrid it's not yet a global city. They are struggling to become a global city, but they are national cities. And then we have regional cities, which influence is on on their own region. This, for example, is every province capital in Spain. So here you have an example of each one. You have Tokyo, which is a global city, Barcelona, which is a national city, and Florence, which is a regional city, which influence it's only in their its own region, which is the Tuscany. Pardon. So we are going to talk a bit more about global cities, and at the top of the world urban hierarchy we have a few global cities. These are urban centers in which decisions are made and their economic activities affect much of the world. What is the most representative example of global city? New York in the United States. They have a population of 12 million inhabitants. As you remember, the importance of the place in the urban hierarchy does not depend on the population but on their importance. For example, there are many cities which are larger and which have more population than New York, but still New York is the most important global city in the world. Why is that? Because, for example, it is the most important economic center in the world. You can see here the skyscrapers, the skyline of the New York City of Manhattan. And here are two examples of the importance of New York. Here you have in this picture here, you have Wall Street. Wall Street, I'm sure you know this, is where the New York Stock Exchange is located, la Bolsa de Valores de Nueva York, which is the most important stock exchange of the world. If the Wall Street goes down, the world goes down. So this affect all the world, all the economic or the economy of the world. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's early in the morning, so I'm a bit still I'm a bit sleepy. I cannot find the words. And also, they're the centers of political decisions, and the most important political center in New York is the United Nations headquarters. You know, the United Nations is the meeting of all the countries in the world, and the Security Council, and many of the political decisions and that are taken in the world are here in this building in the Security Council. So that's why this is a factor of the importance of New York in the urban hierarchy. And then we are going to end this unit with the urban problems. There are several urban problems, there are several problems in cities which we have to face. And the first one are traffic problems and pollution. So the continuous movement of people and goods in urban spaces causes a huge concentration of traffic in cities. I'm sure you have been in a traffic jam in Madrid, in la M30, or in other highways, or in the A4, la A4, which is usually which has usually traffic jams in the morning. So I'm sure you're familiar with this. So this results in the following problems. First, the high cost of building transport networks such as roads and railways. Here you have an example of an American city of a highway connection here, and as you can imagine, this to build all of this, it is very difficult because it is very expensive. Then we have the land use taken up on parking spaces and transportation infrastructures. As you can see here, this highway is occupying a huge portion of the urban space, and this space could be used for housing, for example, but it is needed for transportation, and that is a problem. Then you have the long hours commuting by people who travel long distances to work. Commuting is the travel you make between your house and your workplace. So every day you go to work and you use these transport infrastructures or public transportation, and this usually takes a long time, and that is a problem. Then, therefore, since we have a lot of traffic, then the traffic accidents are more frequent, which is a problem, and Maybe the most important one is the high levels of pollution from car fumes, the smoke that the cars expel to the air, and heating systems. And there is a very good example here in Madrid because we have a lot of pollution. That's why the mayor of Madrid made this Madrid Central, which cars that pollute a lot cannot enter. And here we have this kind of cloud of dirt and pollution, which is all over Madrid and which is called La Boina. Then the next problem is the urban solid waste. So cities produce large amount of solid waste, which we call garbage or trash, and this includes food waste, containers, glass, plastic, metals, and many others. So for this reason, waste management, la gestión de los residuos, in cities can be very complex. It involves selective waste collection, and treating or recycling of some materials like plastic, glass, and paper. I hope you recycle at your home, you separate the trash depending on its material, and I'm sure in Valdemoro, here in Rivas, we have this kind of containers. I'm sure in Valdemoro you also do. Here we have some different containers to separate the trash, the garbage, and to make it easier to recycle for the authorities. For example, we have the blue container, which is used for paper, the green container, which is used for glass, the yellow container, which is used for plastic, pardon, and the gray container, which is used for organic waste or regular waste. This waste management is very costly, it is very expensive, so it is mostly carried out in developed countries. For example, in Spain we are a developed country, so we have this type of waste management. But in the emerging countries or the less developed countries, this is a problem because they cannot afford this waste management. So in many, it is usual that the garbage or this waste is disposed in dumps or landfills like this one that I'm showing you here in the lower picture. This is one of the largest dump areas in the world, Batangerbang, which is in Indonesia, and here people just come and throw the garbage wherever they can. So this is a problem because this can spread diseases and bad smells and many other things. And finally, we have to talk about social inequality. The social inequality, the difference between social groups within a city, is very common in urban spaces, and the reasons are the following. First, mostly the house prices. This influence population distribution within cities, so inside the cities. This is because people live in areas where they can afford to pay the rent or buy a house. The rent is the price you pay to the owner of the house in order to live there, okay? Un alquiler. So, for example, I live here, I live in my house because I can afford to pay the price of my house with my salary. But many people, many poor people cannot afford to pay a proper house, so they have to live in cheaper and in poor material houses. How do you say this? That they are concentrated in a very specific neighborhoods. These neighborhoods with people with low incomes live in small poor quality houses in deteriorated neighborhoods where there is generally more crime and greater noise level. Here I have brought to you some examples. This is Johannesburg in South Africa, in which you can see here in the half left part we have a rich neighborhood with big houses, with gardens, with swimming pools, with wide streets. And then in the right part, we have a slum. We have a very deteriorated neighborhood, which I talk about. We have very small houses, very close to each other, very narrow streets, or what we can call streets. And you can see this is if you had to choose where to live, I'm sure you will prefer to live in this area. And this is the same city, and this is one of the most representative examples of social inequality. And here, this is an example of Madrid, and the most deteriorated area in Madrid is La Cañada Real Galiana, which is very close to where I live. And as you can see here how the houses are. They are made up of metal or wood, and they are handmade. They're very weak. They're very poor. And the crime is one of the most important problems here in these neighborhoods. So also people living in these areas can suffer from social exclusion. This means that they systematically suffer from less opportunities, less rights, and less resources than people in the richer parts of the same city. The people living here in La Cañada Real does not have the same problems as the people living in El Barrio Salamanca, in Madrid, for example. So because these people cannot reach some of the jobs that may improve their situation, and since they cannot improve this situation repeats all over the time. So the sons of these people will not reach a chance to improve the situation, and this problem will be eternal. So that is a big problem. For example, this place comes from the 1950s, if I am right, which was the first time they established here, and the government cannot find a solution yet. So this is one of the big problems that face the cities, especially the cities in developed countries, but also in emerging countries nowadays. So we have finished with this presentation with the Unit 9 cities. Así que, volviendo ya al castellano, espero que os haya servido de ayuda, espero que con este vídeo, vamos, la razón por la que hago estos vídeos es para intentar que lo que es la dinámica de la clase que dábamos en las clases presenciales pues continúe de aquella manera, de la manera más parecida posible a lo que estábamos dando en clase pues en estos días. Y dicho esto, pues nos vemos en el próximo vídeo y muchas gracias por estar ahí.